Hello, and welcome to day 2 of the 3rd annual Global Men's Summit on Masculinity and Mental Health. I have the great privilege of introducing you to Ivan Broad, located in the UK. He is an equine facilitated psychotherapist. He is an Alchemist breathwork instructor. He does regular counseling. He has had a very interesting life, and he's going to be sharing about his process of sexual trauma, a disowned masculinity, his process of moving through that, working in a prison. There's so much he's going to be sharing with us today. So Ivan, thank you so much for being on the summit this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction.
You're welcome. Tell us a little bit more about your journey and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm from Stoke-on-Trent in the UK, which is probably about an hour south from Manchester. I know Manchester's a place that most people refer to when they look at the UK from outside. So yeah, south of Manchester. I've lived here pretty much my whole life. It's really famous for producing pottery. A lot of Wedgwood and places, things like that are produced here. So yeah, it's got its little sort of things that it's known for. So it's a really working class place, like coal mines and pottery industry. Yeah, it's a pretty down to earth place to come from. So my early childhood, I was brought up in quite an impoverished place. Like it's not a lot of money around. Mum and dad were struggling quite a lot. So I was brought up in a house where money was tight and things between mum and dad weren't good. So when I was born, mum never went back to dad. I've got a brother and a sister who are older. So mum never went back to dad. She met somebody who became stepdad, and he was quite abusive, physically, sexual abuse. Just not a nice person, really controlling. Like really disowned masculine traits, toxic masculine. We had to get it right. He'd be straight on as if we got anything wrong. We had to be turned out really well, and very much putting an appearance out to the rest of the world. He was a businessman. He had a steel company. And yeah, he wanted things to look rosy from the outside, but that isn't the way things were on the inside. So yeah, mum got out of that relationship when I was about 12, but a lot of the damage had already been done by that time. So there was quite a bit of stuff between me and my older sister that happened, inappropriate things that I sort of buried, and they didn't come to the surface till I was probably in mid-20s. Things started to surface. But up until then, I'd led quite a toxic masculine lifestyle, like playing rugby, fighting, drinking, a lot of womanizing, like really out of control. And I can remember, because I always used to look for the biggest person to fight with. I'd lock eyes with somebody, and then that classic thing around, what are you looking at? Really sad way of living, really, but I was trying to prove something. And I only worked out later that I was looking for the biggest person to hit, because that represented stepdad. He represented stepdad every time. And then I can remember waking up one day and my wrist was really aching. And it was a bit of an awakening. I can just remember looking at my wrist and saying, like, why am I hurting me? I've been fighting the night before and my wrist was really aching. I'm like, I'm actually hurting me. And that was a sort of pivotal moment for me, where I started to look into what was happening. So I'd lived quite an unconscious life up until I was about 26 at that point. So probably 10 years of fighting and being quite a horrible person, really. And that that toxic masculinity also was like picking on people, more verbally than physically, but it's still unpleasant. So really being on people around how they looked, what they were doing, quite a cutting sense of humour. Yeah, there was a lot of energy behind it. And it was, I later learned it was a lot of sexual trauma and sexual energy that was acting out, which is when it was funny actually, because I actually moved to the Isle of Man. I don't know if you know, have you heard of the Isle of Man?
Isn't that in Scotland? Doesn't that attach to Scotland?
It's a little island between England and Ireland.
Like I always forget what that one is. I've heard of it, but
yeah, it's a big. They have the Isle of Man TT races there every year, so they race around the roads there. And my biological father actually lives there, so I went to stay with him for about a year, and it was much the same. Like he'd remarried, he was hitting his wife while I was in the house. So I was like 28 at this point. And yeah, like sort of fighting with kids outside in the street. Pretty horrible person, really. And I woke up one day and his wife came into the room and she had a big black eye and she was like shouting me and saying, "Ivan, your dad's done this." So I remember just packing all the stuff up that I'd taken over there and I left that day. I booked a ferry back to the UK and got out of there. I was like, I can't live in this sort of environment. And I actually went into therapy and started to look at it all. And I remember it was a lady who was training to be a therapist. So she was doing her counselling hours. And yeah, I had some real light bulb moments, like thinking I had to do what people told me, not realising I had a choice. And it was just simple questions she asked, like, why do you have to do that? And it was like, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh yeah, I don't have to do that. So I realised at that point how sort of closed in I'd become through everything that I'd suffered and how small my mindset was about what was possible. So from there, I jumped straight on a counselling course. So I got a certificate, then I moved on to the diploma. And straight off the back of that, I was lucky to get a job in a prison. A lot of therapists in the UK aren't full-time, or jobs were limited back then. So this is about 2007, 2008. Yeah, and I got a job in a prison, and it was a therapeutic community set up. So there was 40 residents, there was about 8 members of staff. It was all group work. So we'd come together in the morning as a group of 40, and then we'd split off into groups of 10. And the guys in there were looking at their childhood, what had sort of formed who they were. And then they were looking at the parallels with the index offence, so what brought them to prison, because there was often a thread through all of it, and then a thread into what behaviour they were exhibiting in the here and now in the community. So everything always lined up. So it was a fascinating place to work. Yeah, people in there, murderers, rapists, you name it. There was everybody you could imagine, and all working in groups about what was going on in their early childhood. So it was super interesting. I loved a lot of the residents that I worked with. Like, it felt like a bit of a privilege, really. And seeing how someone could go from really aggressive into crying and like really breaking down, and you could see their inner child in them coming through. It was a pretty amazing experience, and it was really strange because the residents were easy to work with. It was the staff that were usually difficult.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of, I would say, toxic masculinity running in males and females within the prison estate. There was a lot of people who liked the power of having the keys, the men and the women. It was, they wanted to be in control, they liked the control. And reflecting on it, I think there was a reason that I ended up in the prison, because it replicated how it was for me as a child so much. Like, everything's regimented, you couldn't speak out of turn, you'd be disciplined if you spoke to people in the wrong way, for the residents. And yeah, people really abusing the power in really subtle ways. So that was a great learning curve for me, and for me to soften into allowing and being open to people's expression, and not having to punish them for being aggressive, or, you know, trying to understand where they were coming from rather than acting on what the behaviour was. So I had to go into therapy when I started in the prison, because it was like sitting with 40 of my stepfathers. Like, the first day I literally gripped onto the chair and I couldn't speak. I remember my boss, the therapy manager, saying, "Oh, you did really well there," when that guy was having a go at you, like you were just like a blank screen. I'm like, I couldn't actually speak. It wasn't me being a skillful therapist, just being a blank canvas. It was like I couldn't actually talk. So I went into therapy again. I did some body psychotherapy, which was amazing. And then I stumbled.
Can you explain for people who don't know what that is? Can you tell us what body psychotherapy is?
So in my body psychotherapy, I'd just lay down on a mattress. I'd talk a little bit at the start about what brought me into the session. And then I'd just lay down, and she'd say, just scan your body and tune into something that you notice. So it may be like a feeling in the tummy, and she'd say, just track it. So I'd just constantly be tracking what was happening in my body, and I'd usually have a release of some kind. So in several I think I had about 20 sessions, and in several sessions, it surfaced a lot of inner child fear, lots of frozen states from when I was really young. So it was a really simple way of working. And then she'd bring in some contact towards the end to sort of nurture that inner child and that sense of safety. And a couple of sessions I like hid behind a chair, and she just sat with me on the other side of the chair and allowed me to be in that place. So it was quite a gentle way of working, but super powerful. And then I later did some EMDR therapy, so EMDR is the rapid eye movement therapy. So you are using, well, it started with eye movement. So the therapy, we'd start with like an image and a feeling that was attached to the image. So it might be, I don't know, me and Dad shouting at me, and then you attach, like, what does it feel like? What's the emotion that goes with that? So it might be fear, and then what are the body sensations? And then you start the bilateral stimulation, which is you can either tap on each side of the body, so on the knees, or you sort of move the fingers like that, and you follow the fingers with your eyes. You keep your head still, but follow with your eyes, and it sets off communication between the two hemispheres of the brain. So what happens in trauma is one side of the brain shuts down. So the bilateral stimulation starts the communication between the two sides of the brain, which starts to process the trauma. That's the sort of theory and practice of it.
Cool.
So I had several sessions of EMDR, and I surfaced a lot of suppressed memories. So stepdad had a shoot where they sort of bred pheasants birds, pheasants, and then they would release them at some point, and then people would pay money to come and shoot the pheasants. So I remember he would take us sometimes at night, and he'd go duck shooting at night as well. There was quite a few lakes around. And yeah, I started to surface a lot of memories around like ritualistic abuse and things like that. So images of like sheep and dead sheep, and yeah, like a real sick, wanting to be sick, and sometimes almost being sick in sessions. So a very visceral sense of the content and the body. And yeah, that was super powerful. It was really strange because after I did the EMDR, it was like something was disconnected. Like I'd processed all this stuff, but my body or mind hadn't caught up with what had happened. Does that make sense? It was like something had happened here and I hadn't quite caught up with what my body. It was a really strange feeling.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has had EMDR and had a similar experience, but that was something that happened for me.
So like a positive disconnection, or like something that still needed, there was like more that needed to be processed to come to resolve?
I think it was like my mind had processed something, but energetically I hadn't caught up with what had been processed.
So like you hadn't like cleared it through.
Yeah, it felt like it was something energetic that I needed to connect with. It was really, really strange fit. I knew something amazing had happened, and I felt quite freed up from it. But I don't quite understand why that was. It was really good though. So I started to find my voice a lot more. One of the things that ran through my life was having a blocked throat. From all the messages I've received about shut up, don't speak till you're spoken to, you'll get hit if you speak out of turn. So I learned from a really young age to swallow everything down. And that showed up in the prison where I couldn't articulate things very well. So with the body psychotherapy and the EMDR, I really started to find a grounded sense of expression. And yeah, and then I had lots of run-ins with the management, the higher management in the prison. A lot of again, a lot of abuse of power things going on, things happening in front of your face, and then people saying that isn't what happened, or that's not going to happen, and then it happens the day after. So it was almost like my inner child was working in the prison, and it's like, oh, this is all happening again. But I think working in the prison accelerated my learning because there were so many challenges coming at me, and I was lucky enough, I guess, to be able to afford to go into therapy. So as all the toxic stuff was coming up, I was able to keep processing it and keep going into work. And yeah, for me, doing a good job. I learned a lot of humility working in the prison, and just sitting with people and being with them. So I started to develop more feminine traits. So being caring, nurturing, all the things that I hadn't received as a child or mum failed to provide. And yeah, and then I found equine work. So working in the groups, I noticed that when someone would be really dominant and the need for control and the need to be heard, and anyone who wasn't like that would get shut down. And no matter how many times you tried to police that, it was always the dominant people who would control the groups. So I started to work out, there needs to be more space, there needs to be more time. And it was a real sort of awakening with that sense. I was like, I can't do the work I need to do or I wanted to do more work at depth.
Yeah.
The prison just wasn't enabling that. So the other key bit is my partner is she's always worked with horses, but she's a physio. She's an equine physio and back lady. And I thought, if I can learn to do something with horses, maybe we can spend more time together at the weekends and things. Yeah, because I don't know if people know, if your partner's got a horse, like most of the weekends spent at the yard.
For those of you in the United States, we'd call that the stable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's working with horses, owning horses as a lifestyle for sure. It's not just like a 9-to-5 job.
Yeah, it's all encompassing. Like, so she lives and breathes the horses. So I was like, oh, maybe I can feel more connected to what Jen's doing through being at the stables with her. And I found a place in the UK called LEAP. It's called LEAP Equine, and they do equine assisted psychotherapy training. So again, once I know what I want, I sort of go after it. So I jumped straight on board with that training. It was about 10 months altogether. So you had to be a psychotherapist to get onto the training. Yeah. And I absolutely loved it. So I know in the States and maybe other countries around the world, there'll be a therapist and an equine expert, and they'll work together with the client. Whereas the LEAP method is that you work independently as the therapist and the sort of managing the horses. And the equine work gave me everything that I was looking for: the space, the time, usually working in 1.5-hour sessions with clients, being outside, obviously a huge difference from working inside a prison where you're locked in most of the day. And that was the sort of next step for me. And recognizing that just talking wasn't enough for people, that there needed to be more. So I think it was about 6 months after I qualified in equine that I actually left the prison system. I'd been in there 10 years at this point. So it was coming up to 2018 when I set up a community interest company delivering equine sessions to people in the local area. So lots of referrals from social services, referrals from local children's homes. And yeah, the equine work is amazing. So with LEAP, we have a series of specific exercises that we do with clients. So the first one might be meet the herd. So anybody coming into a session, we just go and meet the horses. So they go into the field. We do a body scan just to get the people into the body and out of the head. Sure. So let go of where you've come from and be here now. And yeah, just let them spend like half an hour in the field with the horses at liberty. And then they come back and chat about their experience. So
for people out there who don't know what at liberty means, can you share that with them?
Yeah, so the horses aren't tied up or they haven't got halters on or anything. They're just grazing in the field as naturally as possible. So in the CIC, we had 5 horses at that time. So we had a little pony and then some cobs, some Welsh cobs.
Love the Welsh cobs. They're such great horses, and ponies, depending on the section they are.
Yeah, some section Ds, and a little Welsh mountain pony.
That's what I grew up with.
Did you?
I did. I feel like I should get the picture right now so people can see what it is that they look like. I'll be right back.
Oh. So yes, I would bring people into that environment, and they would just come back and talk about the.
Oh, here, I have to take it off the blur so you can see.
Oh, amazing.
So I was 5 years old, and that's the one over here is a Welsh mountain cob. And then this is the Welsh cob mountain cross. That's her daughter. And that's me when I'm 5. So I just wanted people to have a frame of reference, since I happen to have this right next to the desk.
And the horse is at liberty.
And it's at liberty, exactly. And that's what at liberty looks like, because there's no halters attached.
Yeah. So the horses can be free to go up to the person or not, or keep the distance. So it's a very organic process. And then the client can come back and talk about their experience. So they might project something onto the horse, an emotion like, oh, that horse looks sad, or that horse looks detached. So it gives you a sense of the client's internal dialogue, what's in their experience. Because obviously horses haven't necessarily got human emotions or don't process like we do. So it starts to allow you to understand the client's story and where they may be coming from, without them even realizing it may be that they can be so open. So we always start with that. It's a really powerful experience a lot of the time for people. Maybe like Stoke's a big city and a big industrial city, so people haven't always had exposure to horses and animals. So they might be scared, they might be unsure, they might be or just really excited to see these big amazing animals. And then from there we may go into, depending on what the needs of the client are, we may do some reflective exercises with the horses. We can do active exercises with the horses, and we can do creative exercises too, depending on what the need of the client is. And also, if a client's really high energy, we may do exercises to bring that energy down and integrate the energy. Or if their energy is really shut down, some of the more active exercises sort of picks their energy up and allows it to flow a little bit more. So you can be really versatile and creative with how you work with the horses in sessions. And often sort of you will have something come to you and you think, oh, this may work. And you can just sort of have the freedom to do something that just comes to you in the spur of the moment. And often the horses choose the people. Out of 5 horses, 1 may sort of step forward and it's like, oh, it's that horse today. And they can be really persistent, like pushing the head into the halter when the client's trying to put the halter on another horse.
They're like, no, it's my turn.
yeah, it's me today. So yeah, just working really organically with it and starting to trust that the horses probably know better than we do. There's a little saying, humans plan and horses laugh, because they tend to do exactly what they need to do for that client. So super powerful work, really good results. So, you know, homes that kids might be in saying, I don't know what you're doing, but like this person's got really chatty and they're getting more involved in what's happening in the home, where they may have been quite isolated before and not wanting to talk to people. And it was all like, I don't take any credit for that. It's all down to the horses, really. Yeah, and that idea about someone who's been through an abusive relationship or nurturing as a child, that they can have some safe touch with the horses, or some really intimate moments if the horse comes and puts the nose on them or whatever. yeah, it really starts to nurture that felt sense of touch is okay, or intimacy is okay, and they really take it in at a cellular level over a series of sessions. And yeah, the freedom to just be energetically how they want to be in the space. One thing I've learned over my career is the importance of that expression, whether it's energetic with the body or whether it's sort of the verbal word or sound. Obviously, it can be really difficult with horses. You don't want the clients to be too loud and expressive because it can frighten the horses. But this led me on to my next journey, which is with breathwork. And it's really interesting because breathwork came up while I was doing some equine training, so some CPD. So there was a guy in London who came up to the Midlands.
Wait, the CPD, what's that? In case people don't know.
Continued professional development.
There we go.
So as therapists, we have to continually be learning like what's happening, the latest thing that might be happening, or skilling up in certain areas that we want to skill up in. So I went to an event and there was a yurt there. I don't know if you guys know what a yurt is. It's sort of, they have them in Mongolia and places like that. It's a round, usually made of a wooden structure. And it's a lovely space. It's quite womb-like, not like the buildings we generally work in, which are square. So you can feel a lovely energy in there. And I think there was about 10 of us, and we lay down, and there's different breathwork practices, but this one was sucking air into the chest. So you'd have to keep sucking the air in and directing it into your chest for about 45 minutes. And after a while, it was like a buzzing sensation, and it was like it was almost like your energy was expanding out of your body. And I can remember I had a few profound experiences while I was lying down in the yurt. So a sense that I was a buffalo on the plains in America, and I could feel the weight of the antlers, the horns, and I was moving my head, and it was like my head weighed a ton, because that's just what was happening. So that was amazing in itself. And then we were invited to move out of the yurt and into the field where the horses were. So we were led out, because after you've been breathing for that long and taking in that much oxygen, you can be quite lightheaded and a bit wobbly. So I sort of sat down cross-legged in one corner of the field, and then this white horse, similar to the one on your picture, she was a lovely white mare. She just came over and put her nose directly on top of my head, and just never moved for about 15 minutes. And I could feel all this energy rushing out of the top of my head. And I can only imagine that the horse must have been loving the energy, because she just put her nose straight on the top and never moved. And I can remember all these flies coming off her head onto mine. And there was like, I don't know, maybe 50 flies all crawling round. And in that moment, it was like I was a horse with another horse. It was a really profound experience, because at first I was like, oh, all these flies. And then after a bit, I was like, oh, and they were like crawling into the little corners of my eyes like they do with the horses. And for a few moments, it was like we were both horses just in the same space. It was like one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. And there was people there, and when I see people who were there, they'll still say, "Oh, are you that person who was sat with that horse that came and put the nose on you?" I'm like, yeah. And they're like, "I'll never forget that." So people looking in, it was quite powerful for them too. So I was like, I've got to train in breath work. Like, that gave me such a profound experience that I needed. I'm like, I want more of this.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it was probably the next year that I started to train in breath work, which was the next step in the journey. So I'd found the space and the time outside in the field. And what breath work has given me is more time and space on the inside. So the more breath work you do, the more you're clearing energy out of your system. So automatically you end up having more space and time to process. And yeah, really learning so much through the breathwork training. Like, it's really deepened my understanding of a lot of different aspects of who I am, or who I believed I was. So breathwork, there's different types. The breathwork I've trained in has got roots in rebirthing. So there's a guy called Leonard Orey who was from California in the 70s, who breathwork's been around for thousands of years, but he sort of revived it, or made it popular in the West, one of the people. And he was in the bath one day and he was breathing and he had an emotional release, and he didn't know whether it was the water or the breathing that produced it. But he started to investigate it more, and then, yeah, he started to teach people. So there's a couple of different ways with the breath. People either breathe through the nose, generally, in and out through the nose, or they breathe in and out through the mouth. And for rebirthing, it switched at some point from people favouring mouth breathing to it's more the nose breathing that's favoured now. So it's a conscious, connected breath that's continuous. So it's not a spike and a drop, it's more of a wave. So as soon as you get to the top, you breathe out. As soon as you get to the bottom, you start to breathe in. And in the training that I've done, we generally breathe in and out through the mouth. And you look for a 70% in breath and just a 30% out breath. So as you start to do that, you start to build up energy in the body. And anything that may be suppressed in the body or the mind, because you bring in the energy and it starts to push things to the surface. So any repressed feelings, any repressed emotion, any stuckness in the head, through this process, all of that starts to move. It's almost like turning the heat up on the body, and then whatever's ready to come up and move out does. Does that make sense?
It sounds like an interesting process. Just different physiological responses. Di, do you have any questions or comments? Thank you for joining us this morning.
Sorry, I'm a bit late.
It's okay.
I went through the first breathwork course with Ivan. So he was one of the facilitators on the course, so I know how powerful it was. So and it was interesting, the fact with it of not the trauma from a cellular level as well. I found fascinating that I came to terms with my bad parents through the fact of understanding that I had adopted their trauma, and they'd adopted the trauma of their from their families. And when you start to realize how primeval that trauma is, it's not. They described it in breath work. The thing with talking therapy sometimes is like talking to a baby is only going to understand a few words. But with breathworks, because it's primeval, it's the things that we did since we existed. It actually is talking it to the primeval level, and I found it was the best piece of therapy I ever did, to be honest.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's I think talking therapies obviously have the place, and obviously equine therapy does, but for me it's like a stepping stone. So we need to feel some sense of safety in the body. As with the EMDR therapy, we give people the tools to be able to ground themselves, and then we start the reprocessing. So if you go into a state of hyperarousal, you know how to bring yourself back into a state where you're a little bit calmer and you can process fully, so you're not too activated. Whereas with the breath work, we're looking for that level of activation, because the theory is something pops when you put that much energy behind it. But everybody's body is different. Everybody reacts differently to the breathing process. So the skill and the refinement for me has been to notice all the subtleties around what's happening in someone's body, and then making an intervention, or just allowing it, or inviting them to move the body or do something different. So the thing that is different from the equine work is the sort of toning that we do. So to help move energy through someone's throat, we might introduce some that sort of allowing the energy to come through and up and out, or it might be words that people start to say, and we always say things come out the way they went in. So the level of intensity that we've pushed something down is usually the level of intensity that it'll come up with. It will come up and out in the same way. And yeah, we do sort of trauma release work as well. So we bring in touch, and there's different techniques that we use with the body and as someone's breathing to help them release things that are stored at a cellular level. So we know now that trauma is stored at a cellular level, and it can be in any cell of your body, in any area of your body. So what the breath work's really good at is, it's almost, I always describe it to people as, you know, the little snow globes that you can buy, that you shake up, and it's like all the snow starts, that's what happens to the cells of the body as we start to breathe in this way. So all the cells in your body can start to move about. They're not dormant anymore. And then all the information, or any information that those cells are storing, can start to come into your conscious awareness for processing. So it's not just the breath that's changing things, but it's the conscious side of it. So we're always looking, what are you becoming conscious of through the process? And people can have really profound insights and experience so much change through the process. We also breathe in hot and cold water. And I guess people might have heard of Wim Hof.
Oh, yes.
The Iceman. So he tends to look at things from a endurance point of view. So do this, and like you can prove something to yourself. For us, we get into the water as slowly as possible. So we're breathing consciously, and then we're submerging as slowly as possible and feeling absolutely every sensation that's coming up as you're dipping into the water. So that's the conscious side of it. What are you consciously feeling in each part of your body as you're dipping? And we may submerge into the water over a period of an hour, and it's only right at the end that you might sort of duck your whole body in. So we're always focused on what's there, what you're noticing, what you're feeling, and just keep breathing through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's not plunging into a bath full of ice like you see people do. It's a lot more subtle than that, and we're looking for that subtlety of experiencing. And then we also breathe in hot water that's like 37 to 8 degrees, and that tends to bring up womb experiences, birth experiences. So you'll put a snorkel on, you'll float front ways into the water with your head under the water, breathing through the snorkel. And you usually have a facilitator holding the body, and just checking that the snorkel's not going under, and the people are safe. But I've had such breakthrough experiences breathing in the hot water tub. Like it's my favorite module when we do the hot water breathing. So just as an example, the last warm water tub I did in July, I had an experience. I was breathing, and then I'd had an ear infection for a few days prior to getting into the tub, and I started to hear all this screaming as I was breathing, and it was actually an experience from being in the womb and dad and mum fighting while mum was carrying me, and I could hear all the words and him being really nasty to her, and she had obviously taken all this energy, and because me and her are one at that time, all of that energy that she suppressed in her body sort of moved into my body as well, and it was like I was processing all the stuff that she hadn't been able to express. So it was just an amazing experience again. So I came out of the water, and I remember putting my hands on over the side of the hot tub and just feeling all of this energy pouring out of my hands. Like with the horse, the energy was pouring out of my head. With this experience, it was like the energy was pouring out of my hands. I could feel it. It was almost like actual water, like leaving my body. Yeah, and through that process, I came into so much forgiveness. I was like, take this energy back. It doesn't belong to me. It was toxic in my body. And for my relationship with mum, I was like, this doesn't belong to me. And I was like, it doesn't belong to you either, because you shouldn't have had to suffer that. But yeah, it felt like I was able to give it back. So my body wasn't toxified by that horrible aggression.
Yeah.
So yeah, super powerful work, and there's such a depth to it, because you're working at that cellular level, and then the mind is really, when we're breathing like that, and towards the end of the session, it's like your mind is, and your body is open like you are as a baby. Like we're like sponges as a baby, because we've got no defenses. So you're just so open like this. And that's how you are at the end of a breathing session. So when you're receiving nurture and care from people, and people may be saying kind words to you as you're in that place, it's like at a cellular level, you're receiving that you're loved and cared for. So any of that, so it's like you empty out the toxic, and then you're refilled with love and attention and meaning. And yeah, over time, over like the last 4 years that I've been doing this work, I feel like a totally different person. So one thing I wanted to say particularly about masculinity, toxic masculinity, is that we can actually change all of that. We can go from being aggressive, as I was, and closed off and closed down and angry and aggressive, to being loving and caring and nurturing and having an open heart, which is another thing that breathwork is really good at, and equine, when you can open up and not have to have your defenses up. it's a real game changer. And that's what, so it's not that I'm getting rid of that toxicity, but I'm letting go of the energy of it, and then something of me integrates into the whole. It's like the energy integrates into the whole of who I am. And it's an all really organic process, but it's not something you can get to with just talking. So it's been a huge learning curve for me over the last few years. And now I can actually lie down with somebody after the breathe and sort of, you know, hug them or bring some touch onto the head. I worked with someone recently and I just put my hand on the head, and the guy just burst into tears. And it's like, that's the touch I never had from it. He said, that's the touch I never had from Dad. He said it felt like it was Dad's hand on my head at that point. That's what he was experiencing. So, like, super powerful work, and at a deep level. So any of this toxic stuff that we experience and we take on as our own, as Di was saying, like, we take on things and we believe that's who we are. It's not. There's so much more to us than what we've experienced and who we think we are. It's just stuff we've learned and the conditioning that we've experienced. So for me, I thought I was that person who was nasty and critical and controlling. It's so far from who I am now. And the horses, you know, looking back, the horses were on that journey with me too. There was an experience on the training I had where we had to try and get the horse to go over this jump as a group. I think there was 6 of us. And we were trying loads of different ways, like holding hands and trying to move quickly towards the horse, and the horse is just like not moving. And then I can remember just having a moment, and I walked up and put my hand in between the horse's legs onto the heart, and I just touched Milo, his name was. I just touched Milo on the heart, and then he just walked with me. He just followed me, like his head was just behind me, and I just walked over the jump and he just popped over the jump. And the facilitators were like, I think he would have walked with you all day, like seeing it. And I don't know what made me do that, but it was just a sense of heart connection, which I'd never had before. Like, growing up in such a toxic environment, I closed off. It was something, it's what I want people to know is it's something physical. It's not just up here, it's an actual physical, energetic thing that happens in the body. So with things like equine and breathwork, where you're working with your energy, it allows the heart to start to open. And yoga's a really good practice for this as well, because you're opening your chest up and de-armoring. So it's not the masculine, it's more about a balancing of the masculine and feminine. And it's bringing you into that balance that really helps you to heal. So it's not that you're not masculine anymore, it's you're more balanced than you're masculine, because you're more balanced than you're feminine too. So yeah, it's I can't recommend it enough. I can't recommend equine work enough for people who are struggling with the mental health, and I can't recommend breathwork enough. 2 really powerful and profound ways of working. So yeah, and I'd love to know that people were able to have those experiences for themselves. And yeah, hopefully heal from it and be the person that you want to be, rather than the person you were molded into through your experiences.
There's a lot to work on within oneself all the time. It's important to have grace with just the process as we evolve through it.
Yes. And you know, positive and negative positive and negative emotions are just the same thing, really. Like, they've both got equal value, whether that's anger, frustration, rage. For me, that's just as important as experiencing love and joy and ecstasy.
Yeah.
Because one needs the other.
What do you think, Di?
Well, it's that positive and negative emotion that I found so often was shut off in therapy, because I was a therapist myself. Well, a counsellor, because you've got to be careful about using the word therapist. But there's an expected way to behave in talking therapy. And I did their basic Breathworks course. And I said it to you yesterday, so I could say it again today. It was the first time I could actually use the word fuck and swear.
Yeah.
But you say that in the therapy room, especially with soldiers who have some very dark sense of humor. They get reported. But in breathwork, it opens up permission to just let it out, and it's not judged either way, because it's just energy, you mean?
Yeah.
And my experience on the rebirth, I had it with a toxic womb experience. I understood that my mother had a toxic womb, and that I met my dead sister who died before I was born. And I experienced, because you are hyperventilating at that level, I experienced the understanding that she'd always been there, kind of looking after me, because you know, I've been through horrific experiences. So how I'm still alive is just mind-boggling. So it opened to me a kind of a sixth dimension and a seventh dimension, but not in a wow sense. Actually living with it in this kind of world, if you know what I mean, the world that we're in.
Yeah. Thanks, Di.
It's a lot. Well, Ivan, we're coming close to our close. Is there anything you would like to share in closing, or Di, anything else more for you?
Yeah, just that there is, I don't know how many people are listening from the UK, but there's LEAP Equine, who are a great training organisation that I trained with and I've taught on their course. And the people who I trained with is called First Breath. And it's a 3-year training course, so it's really extensive. And we look into all sorts of aspects of what it is to be a human, sort of archetypal energy and all the elements of like earth, air, fire and water. So if anybody's interested in the training, it's a super extensive and thorough training package.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
Where can they find you if they want to do work with you, Ivan?
So I've got a website, and it's www.ivanbroadcounselling.co.uk, and all the other work that I do on there, so counselling, psychotherapy, equine, breathwork, all the information's on there. Okay. Yeah, I'm in the Midlands and sunny Stoke-on-Trent. Not so sunny today.
A little chilly out there.
It's a bit.
Well, Ivan, I really appreciate you coming on to the summit today and vulnerably sharing about your own life story and the wisdom you gained thereof, and all the different things that you did to process and come to the place you are today and get to help so many.
Thank you. And just a message out there to people that it's possible for anybody. Just my message is keep going. Keep finding the people that take you beyond what you think is possible, and enjoy it. Enjoy the journey.
It's a beautiful message to have.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Well, we had something come, so we don't have our speaker for 11, and then we were going to have lunch at noon. So we're going to take a nice long break, and we will be back here at 1 p.m.